Sometimes, the world doesn't break you, it shapes you. This is a story about falling, fighting, and finding light again when the world goes dark. If stories like this move you, inspire you, or remind you that you're stronger than you think, hit that follow or subscribe button. Because your next chapter starts right here. The morning sun had barely crawled over the horizon when Elias woke up on the floor of his small apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills, an empty coffee mug, and silence thick enough to choke on. He had been awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had unraveled so quietly. Once, he had been the kind of man who believed in dreams, in progress, in the power of hard work. But somewhere between the layoffs, the heartbreak, and the pandemic that changed everything, he had stopped believing. Elias worked as a night janitor at a tech company, the kind of place filled with neon lights, glass walls, and people who seemed to glow from the inside. He'd see them during the late shifts, laughing, collaborating, dreaming up new apps and startups that would change the world. He was the one who cleaned their crumbs, emptied their bins, and mopped up their ambition that spilled across the floor every night. But Elias wasn't bitter. At least, that's what he told himself. He was grateful for work, thankful for health, and all the other polite lies people told themselves when they were too tired to fight anymore. Yet, beneath his calm surface was a growing ache, not for money, not even for recognition, but for meaning. He had once dreamed of being a writer. Years ago, he'd fill journals with stories about people chasing impossible dreams. But somewhere between real life and survival, the pages had stopped coming. His notebooks were buried now, under bills, under fear, under the quiet humiliation of mediocrity. That night, after his shift ended, Elias walked home through empty streets. The city was still asleep, the sky painted in dark indigo. He stopped by a small cafe, its lights still flickering from last night's rush. The owner, an old man named Rafi, was mopping the floor. "Early again," Rafi said, without looking up. "Or late," Elias replied, half smiling. Rafi chuckled. "You know, people who can't sleep usually have something burning inside them. Maybe you're meant to do more than clean floors." Elias laughed softly. "I used to think that too." "Then think again," Rafi said, straightening up. "Dreams don't die, they just wait for you to wake up." That line stayed with Elias all day. As the sun rose higher, he sat by his window, looking at the golden light crawling over the city rooftops. He thought about how every morning looked the same, predictable, routine, almost scripted. Yet somewhere in that sameness, maybe there was still space to rewrite his story. He pulled out one of his old notebooks from a dusty box. The pages were yellowed, filled with fragments of stories he once believed would matter. He flipped through them, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and shame. The last entry was dated 5 years ago. "One day," it said, "one day I'll write something that sets people free." Something inside him stirred, not a flame, but a spark. That evening, after work, he sat at his old desk and began to write again. It wasn't perfect. His sentences were clumsy, his words unsure, but his heart, his heart was awake again. He wrote about the people he met during his shifts, the lonely programmer, the overworked manager, the security guard who hummed old songs in the lobby. He wrote about their silent struggles, their invisible hopes. For the first time in years, Elias felt alive. He began posting his stories online, anonymous, small pieces of humanity wrapped in words. He didn't expect anyone to read them. But people did. One post turned into 100 shares. Then 1,000. Then messages started coming in, people thanking him, telling him that his words helped them hold on a little longer. Elias was stunned. The janitor who once cleaned up after dreamers had become one. Months passed. His online following grew. He wrote about resilience, love, failure, and the beauty of ordinary people. He found that the world was hungry, not for perfection, but for truth. And truth, he realized, was all he ever had to give. Then came the message that changed everything. A woman named Mira reached out. She ran a small publishing startup called Sol Rise Press. She wanted to turn Elias's stories into a collection. She said they reminded her of her late father, a man who believed stories could heal the world. Elias hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready. The idea of exposing his heart, his pain, his failures, it terrified him. But he also knew that hiding had never saved anyone. He said yes. Over the next few months, he worked tirelessly, polishing stories, rewriting drafts, pouring his soul into every word. He called the collection The Man Who Sold the Sun, inspired by the janitor he once was, the man who thought he was just mopping floors when he was really preparing to shine. The book launched quietly, no marketing, no big names, no fancy events. Just a simple link on his Medium page. But then something unexpected happened. Readers began sharing his work everywhere. A tweet from a celebrity author called it, "the book that reminds you why you're alive." A teacher in India used it in her classroom. A teenager in Brazil tattooed one of his quotes on her arm. The book spread, not through ads, but through hearts. Elias quit his janitor job. He started writing full-time, creating workshops for people who wanted to tell their stories. He spoke at schools, libraries, and community centers. But he never forgot where he came from, the quiet nights, the mop, the dust, and the dream. One day, a reporter asked him, "What made you start writing again?" Elias smiled. "An old man told me that dreams don't die. They just wait for you to wake up." The success didn't make him rich, not in the traditional sense. But it gave him something deeper, peace. He no longer needed validation because he'd learned that purpose doesn't come from applause, it comes from expression. Years later, he visited the same cafe where Rafi still worked. The old man was slower now, his hands trembling as he poured coffee. Elias handed him a signed copy of the book. "I told you," Rafi said, smiling. "The fire was never gone. You just forgot how to feed it." Elias laughed. "I guess I did." They sat quietly for a while, watching the morning sun spill through the window. Elias looked at it, that same golden light that once mocked him, and whispered, "You know, I used to think the sun rose for everyone else. Now I think it rises for those who dare to look up." Rafi nodded. "Then keep looking up, my friend. And help others do the same." And he did. In time, Elias became known not just as a writer, but as a mentor, someone who believed that stories were bridges, not walls. He created a community called the Sun Project, where people from all walks of life could share their stories anonymously. It grew into a global movement, a place where the broken found belonging, and the silent found voice. People wrote about heartbreak, recovery, addiction, love, loneliness, and the quiet victories of life. Elias read every story, responding personally to hundreds. He realized that his journey had never been about fame, it was about connection. One night, he received an email from a young woman who had been planning to end her life but changed her mind after reading his story about finding light in failure. She wrote, "Your words reminded me that maybe I'm not too late to start again." Elias cried that night, not because of sadness, but because he finally understood what his purpose had been all along. It wasn't to write bestsellers. It was to remind people that they mattered. Years later, long after his books became curriculum material in universities and his platform grew into millions of readers, Elias would often walk the same streets he once cleaned. Sometimes, he'd stop outside the glass building where he used to mop floors, and he'd see his reflection in the glass, older now, but lighter, freer. And every time he saw that reflection, he'd whisper the same words, "Thank you for not giving up." Because that was the truth. No one is too small to make a difference, no dream too dusty to be revived. You just have to wake up. The sun still rises for everyone, but it shines brightest for those who dare to chase it. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that your dreams are not dead, just dormant, then don't let this moment fade. Subscribe to this page, share this story, and take one small step toward your own sunrise.